Welcome, Professor Tag Alkhazin. We are inviting you and are honored to host you at RBC. We are delighted to have you for the third time on this vital issue of water resources in South Sudan. A lot has changed since we spoke last time, and this is why we are meeting today.
Thank you. You are welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. The controversies over the misuse of South Sudan water resources have united the country in a way it hasn't been since the independence vote in 2011. And this outcry prompted the president to suspend all engineering work on the rivers. You were then invited to Juba, where you were joined by other experts, and you were tasked to explain the stakes to the people as well as to the government, and also to come up with recommendations for the way forward. Just to give a background to our listeners who might not be very aware of what this is all about, is that there is a concern about the utilization or maybe even the misuse of water resources in South Sudan for a way that might not necessarily benefit the citizens of South Sudan. And this is what prompted us to invite you in as an expert uh, in the first place. And of course, things have developed since then. As we said, you were invited to go to Juba and tasked with this mission with your colleagues, and you came up with some recommendations. Our question, the first question is, how did the public consultation go?
Right. I must give credit to President Salva Kiir Mayardit. The difference between a ruler and a leader. The ruler wants to stay in the seat. The leader listens to the people, listens to the voice of wisdom, and listens to the what is in the interest of the people. What the president did was, as a result of a recommendation, an appeal that I sent to him in writing through the Minister of Presidential Affairs, and he accepted it. And that is why he addressed the nation in the anniversary of the independence of South Sudan, suspending all activities. That was, he took quote unquote from my appeal, and it was put in the letter. I was really, I give him a lot of credit for that. The public engagement went very well. There were a lot of people around, heaps and heaps of people, but the main objective of throwing light on the issue of water was achieved in full. The people were extremely brave. Some of the politicians tried to hijack the show. One of them said, "We are the government." And the people responded, "We are the people." And we did not
Yes.
submit to intimidation. I think this was the biggest success, that the people actually stood their grounds. They heeded the objectives and the terms of reference of the public consultations. And for 5 days, there were free deliberations over the issue, and a very thick, almost 200 pages recommendations were presented to the president. And I added to that what I call the emerging issues. When you are addressing one issue, other issues might emerge. So I was noting those, and I did a small presentation to the president. So to answer your question, it went well. It satisfied the objective to the extent that it was presented, the findings were presented to the Council of Ministers in an extraordinary meeting of the Council of Ministers on Monday, the 17th, in the presence of the President, and the presentation was done through His Excellency Bernardo Marial, who is the Minister of Presidential Affairs. Thank you.
Yes, that's a point we're going to come to. But the public consultation in general in South Sudan went well when you went there. The second question is,
Sure.
what recommendations did you make? with your colleagues? Was it in form of a paper? And in that paper, what did you include? I'm particularly interested in two things. One is that anything that we are going to do is going to be guided by scientific knowledge and recommendations coming out of preliminary um, investigations, pilot project, whatever, name it. That is my interest because that came out in our prior discussions. So is that included in the recommendations? The other question regarding the recommendations is, should anything be done, is it going to be done with sustainability in mind? Because what is at stake here is that the Sud um, ecosystem has sustained South Sudan and our people for millennia. And if we, through technology, interfered with it in such a way that this water does not become available either in the same quality or in the same quantity to the future generations, we would have done them injustice. So in short, my question is: these recommendations, do they include two things? One, is there going to be pilot projects? Two, are we doing this with sustainability in mind?
Right. The recommendations were comprehensive, but there were pillars for the recommendations. Like any scientific recommendation, it always stands on certain pillars, and if those pillars are not strong enough, the recommendations will not mean very much. It will become an essay. And the fulcrum pillar was that nothing should be done to such a delicate ecosystem without evidence-based, credible feasibility studies, so that we do not make the status quo even worse. That was a guiding principle, and that came out very clearly in the recommendations. The second thing that came out, and people got convinced that water security is part of national security. It does not stand alone. It is not just running water or swamps. Uh, if you take uh, a water source like Lake Chad lost 95% of its surface area in about 35 or 40 years. So that kind of awareness was very clear in the five during the 5 days and in the recommendations that we should not tamper with these systems. God knows what happens in 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. Another glaring recommendation was that the Sud and the waters are not ours alone. They also belong to future generations, and they belong to nations around us, communities around the Sud. And I always mention Bahr al Ghazal and northern Uganda. Without the Sud, the rain they are having now, they are called the green belt. There will be no green belt without the evaporation from the Sud. And then the issue of sovereignty actually came out very clearly in the recommendations, that we should not allow other nations to meddle in the water affairs of South Sudan. And I wouldn't want to go into details on that. The recommendations are there for anyone who wants to have them. I have them in soft form, and I'm willing to share them with anyone because they are public. Another success actually from these 5 days is that the the people, all of us, we stood very firm against any intimidation whatsoever. Some very powerful people were intimidating us, and we told them to go and fly a kite. We did not bend, and we went along with our program,
So
and we
your
had
group was physically threatened while you were in Juba.
threatened. I would say intimidated rather than threatened.
Mm.
There was fear from the government, but fear out of kindness. We had bodyguards. Our movement was restricted, but to protect us. I did not in South Sudan. I don't feel that I am threatened. But this is what the government want to do. But there was intimidation,
From
and
outside the government.
no, from within, from outside the government. Some people came, I would say, on a camp on their own. Once they listened to us, because we were talking knowledge and reason. That's all. We were not talking politics.
That's right.
We did a lot of conversion. We did a lot of conversion from suspicion, from misinformation into support and well information. That was an out of the holes achievement of the 5 days. And while I am on it, I must give a great credit and a standing ovation for the national experts. Salwa, Isaac Liabwell, Aler Oka, and others.
Deng
Uh,
Majuk.
Jonah Cage. I mean, they were very scientific. They were very brave. They were on the side of the people, and they were a very strong pillar in the deliberations during the 5 days. Thank you.
Deng Majuk is one of the young people who were with you. Go ahead.
Absolutely, he was part of the consulting team of the international experts, and really we did not want to go into that international and national. And I always told my friend that I am more of a South Sudanese like anyone else in the whole.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we worked as a team. We tried to play down this distinction between international and national. And we definitely worked as a team. The report writing was very collaborative. We had several meetings just sitting around the table to produce the report. And I produced my own mini report of what we call the emerging issues, because I talked to a number of people, to Western embassies, to donors, to cabinet ministers, to parliamentarians, and things came outside of the 5 days. Other issues came out, and
Mhm.
that was put in a confidential report and handed to the president as well, and it will be followed up also.
Okay. So may I ask what those emerging issues might have been, if as much as you could feel comfortable talking about
Sure,
them?
sure, absolutely. One of the emerging issues was the lack of capacity, institutional capacity in key ministries. They just cannot do their job.
Okay. So this is beyond the water issues, the
This is
water issue.
absolutely, there is a relationship to the water issue, but it is not the terms of reference that I signed on as team leader and lead consultant for the public consultations. These are
Okay.
issues that came out of my discussion with other people. But capacity and lack of it was a glaring one, and without that we cannot go forward. This is just one example.
Yes.
Another example was the disconnect with the embassies, diplomatic missions in Juba. They are in a world of their own. There is no connection and communication with the government and the government systems. So there was a number of key issues. I take them as support activities, support issues that need to be addressed for the big picture and the big issues to be implemented.
Correct. That's fantastic. And did you get any feedback on those recommendations that you made to the president?
Yes, yes. The report was read, and we got a very big smile, and we got a written gratitude and thanks from Dr. Barnaba Marial on behalf of the president for a job well done. We have that in writing. The presidency, not only just the president, but the presidency were extremely happy with the scientific approach, with the knowledge based approach, with the credible approach that we followed during the consultations, and the way the report was written and presented.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Um, Only this week, the government announced that they will commence on what they call river cleaning work. Is this the same Egyptian-led uh, dredging coming in from the back door, as we may say, or is it something completely different and consistent with your recommendations?
This is something completely different. And this is based on the public consultations. It is also based on the emerging issues that I alluded to earlier. It has nothing to do with the colonial project of draining water out of South Sudan.
Okay.
And during the consultations, before and after the consultations, I always allude to the River Transport Corporation that was established in 1912, became operational, fully operational in 1913. Between 1913 and 2011, every year, over those 99 years, the River Transport Corporation would clear the weeds. If a barge sank, they would pull out the barge. So those are obstacles to navigation. They have got nothing to do with the discharge of the water or the ecosystem. These are obstacles to navigation. That's what the resolution is about, to remove obstacles to navigation so that the barges and the tugboats can move freely. But there is no dredging, there is no digging of the base. This is what the Egyptians want. The
And
Egyptians want
we are not going to do that. We are just clearing the
no,
weeds
no,
and
as long
removing
as
obstacles.
absolutely, as long as unity state is put in check, because sometimes unity state behave as if they are a country on their own.
Yes, because of the
They
isolation.
absolutely
Yeah.
the equipment came into unity state, and the equipment is now kept into unity state. The cranes that offloaded the equipment came into unity state. The equipment was consigned to unity state. It was not consigned to the government of South Sudan. It was consigned to the Egyptian mission in unity state. So,
Okay.
but there is enough awareness now to bring pressure to bear on anyone who tries to play games.
Yes, who's collaborating
Yeah, but to
on
answer
this
your
issue because
question,
it's an,
no, this is right out of our recommendations, and the the resolution is comprehensive. It is on the side of the people, and it deals only with navigational purposes. Thank you.
obviously this navigation is vital transport. It will be a vital if we can revive river transport fully. I think this would be remarkable transportation for South Sudan. It can really improve things. I mean, you are very aware that one of the problems that tends to happen is we might have an overproduction, excess of agricultural produces sitting in the north in places like Reng and are not being able to be transported to Juba and other places. Just for the benefit of our viewers, because some of them are young and some of them just don't have the information. Going back to the colonial days and coming well into the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, by the way, to what extent was river navigation? What areas were reached by boats uh, and barges that are no longer being reached today because of the growth of weeds?
River transport almost totally collapsed in 2011. And we have, my own count is that we have 37 barges that have been drowned either purposely or they got drowned out of negligence, and there are an obstruction in various spots in the night. 37 of those barges. Some of them are 200 tons capacity. They have got to be removed. There is a barge, there is a tugboat that drowned. If you are sitting in Juba along the Nile, you can see it physically just close to Juba. It has to be removed. Uh, so as of 2011, and unless something happened that I missed, there was no river transport to talk about. A businessman from Khartoum tried to operate a private one But finally now he's working with the oil companies. He's making money from the oil companies, and nothing is happening for the interest of the people. We are
But
interested in river transport not for the movement of cargo only, because South Sudan is a country of tribal pockets. The Dinkas are in their place, the Shuluk are in their place, the Nangatoms are in their place. If you create this mobility, you encourage the people to mix with each other, and you move from state building into nation building. So there is really a grander objective for creating river transport, because 92% of South Sudan falls within the Nile Basin. So the
right,
objective is not really just commercial, it is also national. Thank you.
true. But what areas, for example, Shambe or Wow or places like
Right.
that, that were once upon a time reachable, but they cannot be reached now. That will be reached once we've done this clearing or
That's
cleaning,
that,
as the government is calling it.
that's right. Of course, you had the long one from Kosti to Juba. That
To
was
Juba.
the main, yeah, with all the jetties along the way. And
Mhm.
during the high seasons, they used to detour to Shambi and then come back through Bahar Naam, Lake No, and back into the main Nile. This has stopped quite a while back, because the facilities are simply not there, and the movement between Tonja and Shambi is no longer that feasible. Uh,
Why?
well, negligence and neglect,
Yes.
and
So when you say facilities, what are those facilities?
what
To
you
take
need is
people.
accessibility. You need accessibility.
Okay.
You need for the barge to be able to come to the jetty. If there are loss of water hyacinths, they cannot do that. If there are
So that's a
obstacles,
main
they cannot.
obstacle now, basic physical obstacles. But
Yeah,
the level of
or still,
rivers, the level
yeah,
of rivers is still high enough to sustain that kind of transport, right?
that's correct. The level of river, it might vary from year to year, mostly depending on what happens in Lake Victoria.
But that's
However, and
historical. Yeah.
that's right, and the rainfall. However, it is not only the level of river. Even if it varies, it comes back to a stable state. So that's not really a
Yes.
very big issue.
No,
It
no, no.
is
What
the
I
jetty
meant,
facilities.
what I meant is whether for because of climate change purposes in the last 30 years, 40 years, that the water might have retreated permanently from these places. That's not what you are saying.
No,
As far as
no,
our rivers are still intact and they will be able to
absolutely,
sustain this transport once it's
absolutely.
rehabilitated.
Let me mention here that over those 100 years of river transport, based in Khartoum North, the draft, the depths of any vessel that came into the Nile was only 4 feet, 120 centimeters. That's all you need. All the vessels of the River Transport Corporation, they had a draft of 4 feet. So you don't need to go deeper than that. This is why the equipment that was brought by the Egyptians with a bucket that has 12 meters reach,
What
this
was just
cannot
useless.
upset. It is not useless. It is there is another objective for it. You do not
Absolutely.
you do not bring 12 meters bucket where all you need is 4 meters bucket,
There is an agenda there.
unless you want to dig deeper. So the equipment is the wrong equipment, and we are going to fight so that this equipment is either uh, taken out of the first surface of the earth, returned to its owners, or parked somewhere under security. It cannot go into the rivers, and we have got news that it may be doing some bad work, but I don't have confirmation.
Oh, so there are rumors that some
Yeah,
work is still going on
yeah.
despite the high level, um, really high profile involvement of the government.
Well, we are going to address the president because his office can ascertain that. Is
Mm.
there dredging to drain water or not?
Yes,
And
and that's
are
obviously a
the people
sovereignty issue. If there is something happening against the will of our, basically it comes down to two things, Professor Attag, is either that is being done against the will of our government or the sovereign people of South Sudan, which is an international crisis matter, or that our politicians are colluding in this. And of
Yeah,
course, either way, we have to highlight it and we have to engage our government on this.
absolutely. Well, the president was unequivocal in his instructions,
That's right.
and he reaffirmed these instructions on October 17th, on Monday, October 17th, once more. And I am sure he will keep hammering on it, and we will keep hammering on it. We, the people, we the people of South Sudan, will keep hammering on it that hands off our waters,
Our
hands
waters.
off our wetlands. Yeah.
Okay, we're coming to a slightly different matter, which you touched on indirectly. Uh, it is clear now that the government, in its last declaration about the cleaning projects that are going on, they are only going to contract local contractors. This is great news for us. However, I've got two questions on this. The first question is the issues that always happen in our countries, both Sudan and South Sudan, that when it comes to bidding, bidding processes, they are not transparent, and our people do not know why the people who were awarded the contract or when the contract were awarded. So my question here is how transparent is it going to be? Because we want to be sure that the best of our people, the best companies, are the ones who are going to be allowed to do it, not the friends of powerful people. So that's my first question.
Right. Uh, as part of what I called emerging issues, I had three meetings with the commander of the engineering corps of the People's Armed Forces of South Sudan. Two of them were together with him and his deputy, who is an engineer. And one of them, we were joined by the Undersecretary of Water Resources and Irrigation. And in all the countries around the world, when there is a contracting business that might touch on the sovereignty of the country, that might have security implications, the engineering corps are either involved as supervisors or involved as contractors. That was not happening in South Sudan. And this is one of the areas that I dug out and I until I got to the right people, and I was amazed to understand that there is quite a bit of equipment within the engineering corps and quite a bit of readiness to come out and serve and protect the people against any foul play. We have got our security organ, we have got our police services. So protection is better than trust. And any contract in any area where the sovereignty of the country can be compromised, we want our forces to be there. We want the engineering corps to be there. We want the security to be there. Either them contracting or supervising the work that is to be done. Other than that, I really, in a country like South Sudan, a young country where the systems are not yet in place, we have got to be protective. We cannot depend on the general trust and we cannot depend on the good word. So your concern is extremely valid. That contracting is not there yet. Even the contracting capacity will have to be built, but we have got to start somewhere. We cannot rely on international grown solutions. We have got to start working on homegrown solutions. So we
That's
need
right.
to help the contractors get established. We need to help them with processes. We need to help them with loans from the bank to buy the equipment. And we need to help them on the modus operandi, how to do things. So it is a long process, but we have to start somewhere.
Brilliant. Which raises the next part of the question, which is once awarded to our contractors, we obviously have this question of capacity that you raised earlier. And in fact, I mean, I'm not saying that there's no, that there isn't any lack, there isn't a lack of capacity in South Sudan. Obviously, there is. but at the same time is probably not as much as we imagine. I mean, they say, for example, that when the Congo became independent in 1963, 62, I cannot remember,
Mhm. Yeah,
they only had
63
about
and
they only had three graduates, and there are thousands and thousands of South Sudanese engineers now. What we are lacking in both South Sudan and Sudan is that our graduates come out and nobody actually takes them on. Colleges gives you the means to learn and analyze and some foundation in your specialization. But the real expertise you're going to develop once you are in the field. And unfortunately, our people are not getting these opportunities. So they're sitting down and their certificates are rotting. My question is, yes, we have capacity issues because we don't have practicing engineers that have done these things before. How do we solve this problem? How do we make it both national, indigenous led, but at the same time, we are able to have world class help or assistance or procedures in place?
when I got to Juba on the 2nd of July 2022, people were talking about capacity building. And people look upon capacity building as workshops, as trips abroad, as conferences. And then I brought in the term institutional capacity building, building the capacity of the institution, not only the personnel within the institution. And the term is gaining prominence now. Hats off and a big thank you to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, a big thank you to the Embassy of the Netherlands in Juba. They are among the few who said, let us differentiate between the government and the people. Let us not ignore the people and their needs. Let us not be dissuaded because we don't like some of the government policies. And they are engaging now in establishing a water institute at the University of Juba. And an initial amount of about 150,000 euros have been set aside for the preliminary work. To the issue of water institute, I added soil mechanics lab and I added water analysis lab so that we have a comprehensive unit. And I'm going to talk about the Hafiz as well that nobody talks about. 50% of South Sudan are either pastoralists or dependent on pastoralism. So you cannot ignore Hafiz when you are talking about water. You cannot ignore Hafiz when you are talking about services for the people. And I am sure others will come, but really I must give credit to the Kingdom of the Netherlands for taking this important sector, and I am sure they are going to have an impact. I am very happy that the term institutional capacity building, the vehicles, the communication, the building, the training, institution, not just the people. One of the downsides that I noticed, the senior people are into trouble. They come from one plane and they go into another plane. I counted one who had international trips 5 times in 1 month. How do they run the ministry? When the undersecretary is not there in a vertical management, I mean, it
Mhm.
goes from the driver up to the it is vertical. There is no horizontal type of management in South Sudan at all.
That's right.
So there has got to be this excessive tri- trips abroad. They have got to be curtailed so that the senior people sit down and improve the performance of their ministries. It was a very bad thing that I observed in almost all the ministries. But we are now on the right track, and I am sure that the gap in capacity, in institutional capacity, through this kind of awareness, the gap is going to become narrower and narrower. Thank you.
In that regard, may RBC be uh, how can I put it, be daring enough to suggest that the government forms a commission out of this committee that was created, yourself, Isaac Liabwell, uh, John Majung Deng, etc., Professor Akage, you people who were there, Salva Jabril, who made a comment, is there a possibility to create a commission or some sort of a permanent body? And this body, together with the University of Juba, together with the engineering corps, together with other local contractors, together with the goodwill of the government of Netherlands, just start the groundwork so that there is coordination, that there is leadership, that there's consistency and follow up. Is that something possible, or is it something already being considered?
No, this was in the uh, recommendations of the public consultations. It was a cornerstone that the issues of water are not to be left for one ministry, one undersecretary, and one minister, and then they can go and do what they want. So this was integrated in our recommendations, and then after the consultations, I had quite a bit of time to interact very widely within Juba. So I came up with what I call uh, emerging issues. These are issues that were not in my terms of reference, but they came because of my presence and interaction there. And this was also very clear that there is need for more than what meet the eye now. This ministry, this person, and that person. And then I topped that up with making an appeal to the president. And I made sure that the president got my document. It was one page. And he issued instructions that Bernaba and I, Dr. Marial and I, should work on this. And the appeal was to set up the commission, to set up committees, and that we should start working on preparing the terms of reference for feasibility studies. And this was one of the main reasons why the extraordinary meeting of the Council of Ministers was convened on the 17th of October 2022.
Okay, so what's awaiting the commission now, and is it going to be technical or is it going to be politically heavy?
What is not clear, and I'm waiting to talk to Bernaba, he sent me a short message this morning, and I think he's out of the country now. Again, people are traveling like mad. They hop in and out of planes all the time. And of course, he represents the president as well. So he's outside the country. What is not clear if this committee headed by Bernaba is that the commission that we are talking about, or is it a committee to prepare the grounds, avail the funding, and the legal framework for the commission to come? So that part is not clear. That is still in what I call the black box. So I am waiting to talk to him to see what is the mandate of his committee, who is represented, what are the objectives, and what is the way forward. Is that it, and they will tend to be the commission under the president, or is it an establishment committee so that it gets things established and then they dissolve themselves and we have the commission we're talking about? So to answer your question, that is not yet clear. I need to speak to Dr. Bernabo on that.
Thank you. A slightly different issue, but it's connected. It's to do with communications, how the government communicates with the public and with the general population. You know, it's very, very important for any government to be relevant to every citizen, so the citizen knows that the government is there for him or her. The reach of the country's official mass media is limited to the urban population. Uh, and this is sad because even Sudan, the country we left, Sudan, the famous Radio Umdurman, could reach all the corners of the country and in all the languages, Arabic, English, and local languages. Back as far back as 60 years ago, how come that in our modern revolutionary SPLM government in South Sudan, we cannot even achieve this in the 21st century?
You touched on a very sensitive chord. The government is in a world of its own, and the people are in a world of their own. The connection between the two is extremely poor. And the democratic assumptions that the government serves the people has a very big question mark. The government assumes that they have the full responsibility without questioning, without checking, without checks, without counterbalances to do what they want. And of course, that's not healthy. This will not lead to there is no democracy now, but this will not lead to democracy. So there is a massive disconnect. I don't know if the part that we did last time about the websites, if that was clear, or if I should repeat that.
Or please include what you were, because we are talking about communications in general. So please
Right.
go ahead.
Right. I think this is important. I think this is
Yes.
important. Uh, the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, and we're going into elections, and we're going into a new constitution. And this is the ministry. If you and I, as citizens, we want to have a passport, we want to have a nationality certificate, we want to have to register a piece of land, where do I go? Where are the laws? Who are the custodians of the laws of South Sudan? They are the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Mowan, the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, as we speak now, they don't have a website. Does not exist. Worse than that, if I want to know how the government is functioning, who is who in the government, if you go to the FBI or if you go to the USAID or to the UN, you will find that the government of South Sudan seems to have a website. So I was quite excited, and the website is http double dots double slash www.goss.ss. That's the website. Put it down, I clicked on it, and I got 404 file not found. So the government of South Sudan hasn't got a website to reflect their activities. The same goes for the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation. No website. The same goes for the SPLM, the ruling party. There is no website. For the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, which seems to have a more polished front, especially when the undersecretary speaks, their website is mentioned in a place called Open Africa. If you go to Open Africa, you will find that they have a website, and the website goes http double dots double slash mef dash ssd.org. You Google that, you click on it, and you get this site channel cannot be reached. So this technical ministry does not have a website. This is just one example of the disconnect. I am now laboring. Today we are the 25th. Since the 17th, that's 8 days. I am trying to get a copy of the resolution of the Council of Ministers. I contacted Mama Rebecca. I contacted Bernardo Marial. I contacted Africano and a number of members of parliament. Nobody is able to give me a copy of the Council of Ministers resolution, which needs to be a public document. There is nothing confidential about it. I
And
mean, the
this is where a
resolution is
website, and this is where a website comes in,
absolutely,
Professor. They will be all
absolutely,
listed there, the relevant documents.
absolutely. I
How
am sitting
much?
in my
How much?
office.
How much would it
If
cost the government of South Sudan to create, let's say, four essential websites? How much per year?
uh, not more than $1,000. If they have an employee, not more than $1,000. If they want to
So a
employ
lack of
a
money,
master,
the lack of money is not an excuse.
no, no, four, five, six, seven, $10,000 maximum, including the salary. The salary of another secretary is $50. So the salaries are very poor in South Sudan. So you are talking about $1,000 to $10,000, and we have a website for the government. They don't have that. Why don't they care about the people? Don't they care about communication? Are they lacking in funds? Are they lacking in know-how? Because a lot of the people who have got the expertise have left the country or have left the government. So this disconnect is actually extremely difficult. You cannot even start to have democracy or talk about it if you are disconnected from your people.
Thank you. Uh, we're going back to our water issues.
Sure.
South Sudan suffers from what we might call a seasonal twin evil.
Yeah.
These twin evils of drought and floods are a huge headache for South Sudan. They destroy crops and they kill livestock. In your recommendations to the government of South Sudan, did you recommend any solutions, a permanent solution that will avail water across all seasons and minimize floods and eradicate um, droughts? And may I ask, if you have made a recommendation to the government, would the solution you are recommending involve tampering with the sea? For example, diverting the water into artificial lakes, etc. Or do you completely avoid tampering with the suit? And if so, what recommendations did you give, or are you planning on giving?
Right. Well, if I had tendered in a recommendation in the report, I would have been defeating my own advocacy, because this is not an issue for one person to be sitting back and claiming that he's Mr. Know It All and start issuing advice.
You are a committee
My
of
reco-
experts. You are a committee of
uh,
experts that were picked.
no, but for a specific objection, objective, and that is co- public consultations. We were not tasked with finding solutions. We were tasked with doing public and community consultations. Period. My contract is very clear, and there is no way, as an individual or two people or three people, without funding, without time, if I want to find the solution, then I will probably need 4 to 5 months. I will probably need 150 to $200,000. I will need a team. I will need offices. I will need cars. I will need aerial surveillance. I will need satellite photos. So to be able to address an issue like that in an area which is about 70,000 square kilometers of sud, it is not for one person, one man, to actually sit back and say this is the solution. But let me take you back a little bit. What you described is not particular to South Sudan. Just look at Nigeria. Just look at southern Nigeria, what is happening now. Look at South Africa. 400 people were killed. The same thing. Certain places have got drought and certain places have got floods. Look at Pakistan. Look at India. Look at Bangladesh. Look at the western parts of Canada. Drought, not a drop of rain. So climate change is not a curse that was sent by the Almighty to Sudan, to South Sudan and his people. Climate change is now a universal phenomenon. The whole system is going wild, and wherever you go, there is a problem. It is either drought or it is floods, and it can alternate. Just look next to us. Just look at Somalia. Look at Ethiopia. Millions of people are now, children are dying because there is no cultivation. The camels and the goats and whatever have you, their animals have perished. Look at northern Kenya. Kenya is closer to the equator, where a lot of water should actually be pouring more than 200 inches per year. There is a drought. People are dying and the cattle is dying. So I don't want us to look at our situation as if we are an isolated island, because we are not. So whatever is happening to us is not a curse sent from the Almighty just for the people of South Sudan. This is global. Wherever you go, Spain has a problem. Italy has a problem. Germany has a problem. I mean, these are northern countries. So we need to look into that context. And if one is to give a general advice without a feasibility study, is whenever you are talking about climate change, you need to talk about climate adaptation. Part of the adaptation is you move the people to upper grounds. Part of the adaptation is to build dikes. Part of the adaptation is not to build bridges that block, or passages that block the conduct of the rivers. Part of the adaptation, if there are any obstacles, remove the obstacles without deepening the river and draining the water. So there are generic advices which we have given. I have given those advices that you don't drain your water because you have got floods. You deal with the floods as a phenomena, and you look at what happened and how you can mitigate the situation. The only people who had a scientific approach were the Dutch embassy in South Sudan, where they sent a team and they came back with amazing results, amazing analysis, and it is in their website. If you Google the website of the embassy of the Netherlands in South Sudan, you will find the report. And they found that people have actually built structures in the passage of the water. If you take Bor, people are crying foul. I was there in Bor for 8 or 9 months with the World Bank. And the problem is that the water cannot reach the river, not that the river has come back and inundated Bor. So there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done. What what we have done, the international and the national team, and I have got to give a lot of credit to the national experts, is I think we have scratched the surface. We have told the government that the status quo is not an option. However, draining our waters is not an option. So we were just within that sphere of awareness, but we did not sit there, as we were not commissioned as a team to come up with scientific recommendations. Thank you.
Absolutely. But reading between the lines, these are the things that we hope will come out of
Yeah,
any preliminary or any fact-finding initial research that the government might commission your team, or another team to do
yeah,
in the near future.
that's correct.
Brilliant. Uh, a final question, perhaps. John Garang taught us that by creating South Sudan, it is not separating people. The Sudanese remain the same people, some in the north, some in the south. But we've been divided by ideologies, we've been divided by certain mentalities of how countries should be governed. And you are a good example. You are a good example who have always kept your relationship with South Sudanese. And in the worst days of deliberation, you remain in very, very close contact with the people of South Sudan. Uh, you've stayed very closely with the SPLM and made friends. Are there people that have left impression on you that you might take this opportunity while we are chatting? It's not the only opportunity; there will be many. But do you want to commemorate anybody or any group of people today?
Right. Between Omar al Bashir and Hassan al Turabi, they put me in jail as a political activist 11 times. And in the 11 times, my crime was that I have got friendly relations with the people of South Sudan. Maulana Abel is an honest man. When there was a scarcity of fuel in Khartoum, he refused to buy fuel in the black market. And I had my company and I had my stores, and I had my own supply of diesel and petrol. He would come with his jerrycan. He will insist to pay the cost as it is in the pump, and he will go himself to the accounts department, pay, fill his jerrycan, and put it in the car. For that, whenever he comes, I get arrested and I get interrogated.
And tell me, this was at the time when Turabi had come to power and Abdullah now is a private citizen.
No, yeah, Abdulaziz was a private citizen, but the whole thing
But
started.
honest enough, still honest enough,
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
As a Sudanese citizen to not go in the black market and buy fuel.
well, he's the man. He's a man of his own cut. Integrity, knowledge, intelligence, honesty. I have a lot of respect for this man, and I am a family friend of him and Madame Siama and their late daughter. But this was just one example. Another example, there was a pilot by the name of Peter. Peter was supposed to be the pilot of John Garang. He's married to the sister of Maulana, the first Chief Justice of South Sudan, Ambrose
Ambrose
Ring.
Ring.
Ambrose Ring.
Ambrose Ring.
He's
Yeah.
married to the daughter of Ambrose Ring.
Okay.
Peter was in the Brezet. He was part of the SPLA, and his family were in Khartoum. And I have got pictures with my wife and with his wife and his children, and they wanted to go and join him in Ethiopia. I mean, they are not carrying guns. They are a woman and her 2 or 3 children. And one of the priests at that time in Khartoum, South Sudanese, he chickened out. He was not willing to do the job, so he brought them to me, and I managed to get them passports and get them exit visas. And then when Turabi discovered that, I was arrested. I was kept in prison for 21 days for helping a woman and her children to join the husband. They had no guns. They did not even have a piece of paper. And the story goes on and on and on and on. Sometimes I travel. When I come back, I am arrested at the airport. So I paid a fairly heavy price with no regrets whatsoever for my personal relationships with the people of South Sudan. I used to go with Joseph Lago to Nimuli, where his house there and his farm were under the supervision of Felix Onama. Felix Onama was, I think he was the Minister of Defense of Idi Amin, and he was a Mahdi like Joseph Lago. And we spent 3, 4, 5 days just together. So the relationship was not political really. And I could see myself more as an African when I am either in South Sudan or dealing with South Sudan. I spent over 20 years of my life in South Sudan. I dug over 20 boreholes and I constructed over 50 hafirs in South Sudan, sleeping under trees. And the people will give me milk and asida at night. I was never harassed. I was never insulted. I was never in danger. My relationship with the people of South Sudan is with the people. But people to note is Dr. John Garang. The first time I met John Garang was in May 1972, the first Addis Ababa agreement when they were in Busari and I was building the White Nile Brewery in Wow. So John Garang is somebody I would distinctly remember. Another person, if a statue is to be put in the middle of Juba, it will be the statue of Martin Maniel, a hero, a patriot, and a thinker. It was Martin Maniel who saved the SPLA. It was Martin Maniel who came with the concept of Plan B when he felt that with his intelligence that Mengistu Haile Mariam was falling. What are we going to do? We will be sacked out of the Brezet. And he was right. He and Justin Yaj, another close friend of mine, the late Dr. Justin Yaj, they are the ones who prepared the grounds in northern Kenya for the SPLM, SPLA to move from Ethiopia to come into northern Kenya. Males Zenawi gave Justin Yaj 3 days, an ultimatum. You leave the Ethiopian soil within 3 days. And they walked and drove from the Brezet, Itang, wherever it is, up to Moyali in 3 days into Kenya. If it were not for Martin Maniel and Justin Yaj, this might not have happened.
It's amazing.
And
Yet,
Martin
yet,
is
yet, a lot of people died in that exodus,
absolutely,
being attacked by the Ethiopians and also by the
absolutely,
Sudanese army along the way.
ab- absolutely. So he's someone. There is a personal and emotional part as well because he gave me his last will and I
Mm.
executed the will to the letter. And I
Oh,
have a lot
tremendous.
of respect for that man. Justin
Mm.
Yaj is another person. I have a
Mm.
lot of respect for him. Lawrence Woolwool, the
Mm.
first minister of planning in the north and a graduate of the Sorbonne. He's
Mm.
an intellectual, and his wife Asunta, who's Equatorian. I
Yeah.
used to come and stay with them at home. Uh, Peter Jatkot, I used to drive with him, his white Mercedes.
Yeah.
I have in my records, I managed to write down what I called the founders of South Sudan, and I have a list of 130 of them. I knew all 130 of them personally. And now I have put out a scholarship of $250 for students to take a number of those people and write their life story because what I have is just the names. I don't have the time to write about that. And I will
Mm.
contact Professor Jonah Cage and take this into action so that the younger generations know who these people are, who are the founders and the fathers and mothers of South Sudan. This is a very big gap. People are working into politics and they're forgetting the history. And
That's right.
when you forget your history, it is like someone who lost his memory. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And in that regard, then, you have seen what we've gone through, and you've seen the tragedies of both South Sudan and Sudan, to be honest. I mean, the only reason we came out of Sudan is there was a belief that a new country based on the rule of law and based on ideals and not just ethnic identities was going to be created. And all we succeeded in doing is to create another mini Sudan. This is heartbreaking, and I'm sure it's heartbreaking for a person like you as well. What advice would you give to our divided leaders now, um, to work in memory of these leaders that you've mentioned, of these past heroes, and to put South Sudan first?
You give advice when you feel that your advice has a listening ear, and you give advice when, after the listening ear, you find that there is the will for action. And after that, there is a priority for that action. And after that, there are the resources for that kind of action. Regrettably, right now, this is not the time. Nobody is thinking like that. Nobody is putting the advice of how to get out of this slump as a priority. The status quo seems to be an option for many people. But South Sudan has been a fragile state for 22 years now. And according to the political scientists, evidence based, this is not it is not a theory. They will not get out of fragility until 2050, another 20, 28 years. And fragility stands on three legs. We call it ALC: authority, legitimacy, and capacity. And the three are not available in South Sudan. So there is a structural default that needs to be addressed first. The second thing is not many people now are talking about the sanctions. And the sanctions are either United Nations or United States. And both of them have got three benchmarks. And in each benchmark, there are subsections. And it was a good friend and a colleague, Dr. Francis Deng, who had a word with the president, and he told the president that the sanctions are not going to go away because we are crying foul about them, because we are saying it is not fair. No, they are not going to go away. The sanctions are not going to go away until the benchmarks are met. That's it. They will stay there forever until the benchmarks are removed. The benchmarks are not really that difficult. Part of them, they require assistance. I did not sense that there was a political will within the government to really address the benchmarks in a serious manner. So that's an obstacle that has to be removed. There are certain areas when we are talking about child soldiers, when we are talking about ammunition and arms and so on, South Sudan cannot do it alone. Just looking at the formation of the government, there are four vice presidents. Everybody has got his own forces, his own cantonment, his own weapons, and they are not willing to put it out. So what will encourage them uh, to participate in dealing with the sanctions? So that is the second obstacle. So if I were to give a generic advice to the government of South Sudan, it is to address fragility and to address the sanctions. Only then the current situation where there is donor fatigue and there is compassion fatigue can be addressed, and people might come to help us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Professor Taj Alkhazin, your expertise, and your compassionate and wise advice to South Sudan. Thank you very much, and I'm
You're
sure we'll meet
welcome.
again.
Sure. Okay. Okay, Mohan. Take care. Ma salama.